The original Crisis Core released years ago back on the PSP, a long time before I started playing Final Fantasy games. Ever since VII Remake released, I heard about this game and have been wanting to give it a try. Even without playing, I've seen the Gungaga meme all over the internet.
Me? Gungaga.
And knew it was only a matter of time until I actually understood where the clip came from. So you can imagine my excitement when I finally got my hands on the game. Going into this, I was unsure if to call this a remake or a remaster. Even after starting the game and seeing the graphics, this was a tough call. In the end, I decided to call this a remaster as it looks drastically different than the original, but there's still enough here from before that I can't call this a full-on remake. Taking a look at the original and how that looked versus this remaster, the difference is night and day. Don't get it twisted, the original still looks solid considering it released on a handheld, but Reunion just takes it up another level. Everything from the character models to the environment looks clear and crisp, kind of how you would expect a game today to look. Honestly, if you didn't know that this game was a remaster, I think it could serve as a PS4 title because the graphics are just that good. Because it looks so nice, your eyes quickly adjust to this new look, but every now and again, the game will play cutscenes that are ripped right from the PSP version. Not a bad thing, but it can be a bit jarring the first time around. As you get farther into the game, the graphics hold this level of fidelity and maintain it throughout the gameplay as well. Many times when playing games, especially old ones, the interactions between the characters outside of cutscenes usually look significantly worse than the main cutscenes. In this game, even the talking sections between characters looks really good. There isn't much to critique, but it's worth mentioning that sometimes the characters will look a tad off in those open dialogue sections. A good way to describe it would be low resolution because they're definitely not completely blurry. The gameplay is exactly what you would expect from a game like this. Even if you never played a Final Fantasy game before, you could pick this up and understand the mechanics easily. At its core, it's about the same, but the gameplay was tweaked a bit to line up with VII Remake, which I thought was a great idea. Attacking enemies with Zack feels good, especially when using the Buster Sword, as every hit feels heavy, like you're really hitting the opponent. Even when you're surrounded by enemies, it's easy to constantly switch from target to target, making everything seamless. The main issue with the combat is the enemies and how they attack. Normally when you fight something, you watch its movements so you can memorize its patterns. Once you have that down, you find the openings and defeat it. Gaming 101. But in this game, that's not really the case. So when you're fighting an enemy, they perform a series of attacks. These could be physical or magical, it doesn't really matter. But after you see them perform the attack, you'll probably find the opening leading you to attack it. Where it gets annoying is that the enemy will continue to attack, even after finding its opening. This forces you to kind of go in and out when attacking or using magic attacks from far away, so you don't take unnecessary damage. I thought that this was the biggest reminder that at the end of the day, this game is still a PSP game, and at times you can definitely tell. After a little experimentation, I find that going directly behind the enemy and attacking would inflict the most damage. So it seems that if you want to succeed, be sure to memorize the patterns and attack behind the enemy instead of from any angle. A weird difference, but one that's easy to adjust to. One of the most satisfying things about Final Fantasy games is fighting a new enemy, and then dying because they use an attack, then finding what spell to use to counteract that specific attack. In Crisis Core, this happened in my playthrough a lot, as most of the enemies have a set number of physical attacks, but after you memorize those, what makes them different than any other enemy? Well, that would be the various magical attacks. Obviously, these magic abilities change depending on who you're fighting, but how they're implemented is what makes it so memorable. Usually, the enemy will perform these attacks at the worst time during each fight. It's either when you're low on health, they're low on health, or after a set amount of time in the fight. Knowing that these attacks are coming forces you to create a material loadout that will equip you with everything you need to survive. For example, there's multiple boss fights where the boss uses some sort of magic attack that can completely decimate your HP. To counter this, equipping the magic barrier materia and leveling that up will reduce and sometimes completely negate these attacks. The entire materia system is a mechanic that makes the combat even more addicting. Don't get me wrong, in the PSP game the materia was still present, but the way it's organized and layered in this one makes it more inviting to use. Once you understand the materia fusion and how to create different materia, you can craft a unique build for your version of Zack and then apply that to any situation. Now I understand the game itself is old, but I thought the difference between the difficulties was staggering. There's only two modes you can choose from, normal and hard. When playing on normal, the game feels relatively easy. There isn't a lot of parts where you should struggle unless you try to rush through the game. I didn't even need to grind until I hit a certain boss fight, and even then I didn't spend too much time leveling up Zack. On the other hand, hard mode was a lot more difficult, obviously. But it's not hard because the enemy design or attack patterns are changed, but because they take an absurd amount of damage and dish out just as much. When fighting on this mode, the fights are twice as long, as it feels like you just keep mashing attack over and over until their health finally dwindles down to 0. If you plan on playing this on hard mode, get ready to grind for hours because you're going to need the best materia and lots of items to survive the late game fights. Speaking of grinding, I really appreciate that this game was designed to make it easy to level up. A lot of times when you want to gain levels, you would run around each area like a chicken with its head cut off and kill things till you get to the desired level. However, in this game, there's a whole bunch of side missions that you can choose from to do the same thing. In these missions, you fight a different set of enemies, with all of them giving you some sort of reward for completing them. Be warned though, don't complete the missions that are high leveled until you yourself are strong enough. They start you out with low level missions, but you unlock more as you progress the game. Normally it wouldn't be a big deal, but there was times I chose a random mission just to get bodied by a boss I wasn't expecting to fight. It's worth mentioning that you don't lose anything by failing these missions, you just have to redo them all over again. When looking at the map, it's easy to navigate between each area as the doors are marked at the end of each hallway. Even when you're in a place with multiple floors, it's not too hard to figure out where to go if you look at the map. The most annoying part of the navigation is the amount of barriers between each room. The entire game is segmented into sections that are separated by loading screens into the next section. I understand why this is, as the PSP can only handle so much, but when actually playing it, it does get a bit annoying to constantly have to load when switching rooms. Playing this on the PS5, the screens are very short, but it's still noticeable. The rooms aren't a big deal since I know the hardware limitations, but the enemies spawn right in front of you room after room, with the game forcing you to stop and hear it say,
"Activating combat mode. Activating combat mode. Activating combat mode."
Get used to hearing that, because you're going to hear it a lot. There is a way to escape these fights, but when running away, you run into the invisible wall that separates the rooms from one another. When running into the wall, you have to wait until the escape meter fills up, and then you'll move on to the next room. This can get annoying as the enemies don't stand and wait, but close the distance and start attacking you. So it's up to you to be aware of how close the enemies are so you don't get hit as you try to escape. Now, moving from place to place isn't really a hassle because there is a sprint button, but the rooms and enemies will definitely slow you down. But considering the age of this game, that should come as no surprise. Looking at the gameplay as a whole, that's really it. Since it's a PSP game, it's not that in-depth outside of the materia fusions, but even still, it's a lot of fun. Because it's so easy to understand, the replayability for this is very high. No matter if you're a hardcore Final Fantasy fan or new to the franchise, you should have a good time when playing this. I think the story is the most entertaining aspect of this title. Without knowing anything about FF7, you probably know or have at least heard of Sephiroth, and yes, he's in the game. But the game's main character, Zack, is one that's very likable. At first, he seems kinda stupid as he's really carefree and easygoing, but as you get deeper in the story, you see that he takes things seriously and displays a lot of emotion, especially when the situation calls for it. Outside of Zack, there's other notable characters that help make his journey memorable. Similar to 7 Remake, it's the combination of all the characters interacting and how their decisions are weaved into the overall plot is what's most intriguing. In the beginning, the problem is made clear up front, but as more gets revealed, the story goes in a different direction. Now, you may be one of those people who think, man, I don't care about this story, I'm just trying to play. And I feel you, I need my action too. But understanding what's going on and why it's happening is extremely vital. If you're unaware, this game serves as a prequel to Final Fantasy VII Remake, and after playing this myself, I would say that it's 100% absolutely necessary to play this first before the remake. It gives so much context and explains why certain characters are the way they are when you first start FF7. This game does a fantastic job at setting up the world, establishing characters, and building the relationships that carry over into the next game. I thought for a PSP game to do all of this was extremely impressive. If you choose to skip this game and go straight to the remake, I wouldn't blame you, but with the game being broken up into 3 parts, it won't hurt to run through this story just once. Trust me, you won't regret it. To put it simply, this story is fantastic. It keeps you in suspense as you think you know the direction of where it's heading until certain events happen and things change in an instant. There's tons of emotion shown by all the characters, especially Zack. You can feel the weight of the situation as things seem stable at first but quickly fall apart, making a bad situation even worse. If you're hesitant on playing this because the story seems complex, it's not if you pay attention, and putting the pieces together can be very rewarding when all is said and done. Overall, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is exactly how a remaster should be. It changes the graphics so much that it blurs the line between remaster and remake while upgrading the gameplay just enough to improve the overall experience. Most of my issues are due to the hardware limitations of the system, which affected how the game was originally designed. If this game were to be remade, I'm sure it would eliminate a lot of those problems and be even better. For those reasons, I'm going to give this game an 8.5. When you combine the gameplay, updated graphics, along with the story, Crisis Core serves as a fantastic prequel to one of the most beloved video games of all time. If the game was able to be rebuilt from the ground up, then it could align more with the newer Final Fantasies we have today, but this remaster is definitely good enough. Think of Crisis Core Reunion. Do you think this remaster is better, or do you prefer the original on PSP? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
I had an epiphany. Let's go to the Promised Land. Mother.
Sephiroth! Why did you kill the townspeople? Why did you hurt Tifa? Answer me, Sephiroth!